Hello and welcome to Ad Hoc Politics. I am Asher, and I just wanted to jump on here and share some of my thoughts about the current geopolitical situation, mostly focusing on the war in Ukraine. And so recently, all the talk is of these Tomahawk missiles that the United States is threatening to supply to Ukraine so that they could use these presumably in their ongoing campaign against Russian energy infrastructure. It's a long range weapon that could be fired very, very deep into Russia and could go probably a lot further and has a much bigger payload than their current drone offensive. And so that's kind of where we're at, where this seems to be the latest round of escalation or escalatory threats that the West is heaping onto the pile of escalations that came before, and I'd say that this is a very ominous turn of events here. And even the Biden administration, I don't think ever considered this. But if you cast your minds back to the beginning of the war, Biden said that supplying aircraft would be World War III. That we can help Ukraine, but there's certain things that we can't really do. And but as the war has kind of gone south for the Ukraine and for NATO, and make no mistake, the Ukrainians are not defeated; they are holding on. Um, but they're slowly, ever so slowly, being crushed in a vice. And all the efforts to kind of destroy the Russian economy and to isolate it, they didn't. It hasn't really come to fruition in the way that the people that planned this war had foreseen. And so we have a situation on the battlefield where it's a grinding war of attrition, and the amount of resources and men that the Russians can bring to bear is just much greater than what Ukraine and the West can bring to bear without further entry into the war. The manpower situation is something that we can give all the weapons in the world, but unless you want to join the war itself, then can't help on the manpower front. But anyway, so the idea is that I guess by giving Ukraine these long range cruise missiles, that's going to compel Russia to capitulate, I guess. Or they say bring them to the negotiating table, but they are already at the negotiating table. We just don't like their demands. Um, so the messaging is very kind of deceptive. But anyways, this seems this seems like a really bad idea to me. These The Tomahawk was originally a nuclear armed missile, and it still has nuclear capabilities. And so we're talking about a system that I think very few European NATO allies even have access to. And in effect, the United States, if we were going to give these to Ukraine, we would have to do all the targeting, telemetry, all of the programming. Maybe we could set it all up and the Ukrainians could press a button and it'd be like, oh, it wasn't us, it was them. But in reality, this would be the United States launching these long range nuclear capable missiles into Russia. And gosh, if this was the Russians doing this to us, I mean, it'd be, it'd be World War III. And at some point, they're going to respond to all these escalations. And I don't know what that's going to look like. Is it going to be they're going to declare war on Ukraine and end the special military operation and make it an actual war? It's possible. Unleash the Oreshniks. I'm not sure, but at some point they are going to respond to further escalations. And if these weapons are supplied, are they really going to bring the Russian economy to its knees? I don't think so. Like we've seen these things recently used in Iran. And it's kind of hard to tell how effective that strike was on the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. It seems like, according to Trump, it was completely effective, but it also involved B 2 bombers, like actual bombers dropping high payload bombs, bunker busting mega bombs. Like, so it's maybe not the greatest analogy, but historically, if you look back in World War II and the Allies' attempt to destroy the German economy, you had fleets and fleets and fleets of big bombers dropping fat payloads round the clock, day and night. And it took a tremendous amount of effort to bring down the German economy. And Russia has a way bigger energy infrastructure than Germany ever had. That was one of Germany's big weaknesses, is that they didn't really have a lot of energy infrastructure in Germany itself, and it was a vulnerability in World War II. And but even taking that out took a tremendous amount of effort. Um, and so launching these missiles and drones into Russia is that is like you're going to need tens of thousands of these things, and you're going to have to assume that the Russians aren't going to be able to intercept them. And it just doesn't seem like it's going to be this Wunderwaffen that's going to change the war. It seems like it's just an escalation. It's just another step up the escalatory ladder, and eventually the Russians are going to respond. And why this is so concerning is that it feels like we are sleepwalking into an open conflict with the Russians. And you hear this with the heightened rhetoric coming out of Europe. They're talking openly about war with Russia in, I think, 2028 is when they're trying to be prepared for this. They're talking openly about it. And is this saber rattling? Is this to distract their domestic populations from all of the failings and problems in Europe itself? Possibly. It is kind of a way to unite people with an external enemy. That's a time tested tactic to unite your internal audience. But at the same time, what if they're serious? What are they actually serious about wanting to have a war? Because this will go nuclear. If there is a war between NATO and Russia, it almost certainly will go nuclear. And it feels like we are sleepwalking into World War III. And for what? It's crazy. And anyway, so I guess the other big escalation would be the seizing of the Russian assets that have been held, have been frozen in Euroclear since the start of the war. I think it's about 300 billion euros, and the EU has been very cagey about actually seizing these assets because it would send a very bad precedent across the rest of the world that pull your money out of Europe because it's not safe here. We can, at our discretion, basically confiscate your assets if you do something that we don't like. And so I think a lot of the financial people in Europe are like, well, we shouldn't do this because a lot of the investment is going to leave. People aren't going to feel confident leaving their money in Euroclear or European banks because the Europeans can just steal it. And so, but they want the war to keep going and they need money. Ukraine is on life support. Zelensky said that he needs $120 billion next year alone to continue Ukraine, for continue Ukrainian government and to continue fighting the war. That's just next year. And so Europe has to pay for that all. And previously, the United States was paying, but Trump doesn't want to pay for any of this anymore. He wants to make money off of the war, which is another kind of sinister thing. But anyway, so if they do seize these assets, then it's a major, major escalation, and it's putting their own financial health and legitimacy on the line and could very well cause probably not a cascade, but a slow withdrawal of foreign capital from Europe and foreign investment from countries like the Gulf states and China, India, Indonesia. I think they would be very hesitant to keep their money in any kind of European banks or European investments. And so what we see is that the battle has slowly gone in Russia's favor. Like I said, Ukraine's not defeated. They're fighting extremely courageously, tenaciously. Every inch that the Russians gain in Ukraine costs a tremendous amount of blood and treasure. And it does very much seem like a futile war to me, a pointless futile war. But it is where we are. And even at great cost, the Russians are advancing. They're squeezing the Ukrainians. Like I said, it's like a vice. They're slowly squeezing them. It's a steamroller that's slowly advancing. And really, the only hope for victory now is to destroy the Russian economy. Nobody thinks that the Russian army in Ukraine can be defeated. The original kind of idea of this beach party in Crimea and we're going to sweep through Donbass and take all this stuff back, that's been completely abandoned. Now it's just trying to hang on for dear life. Can we hang on to Pokrovsk? Can we hang on to Konstantinivka and Sloviansk? So the war aims of Ukraine has gone from reconquest to, or from liberation, I should say, to just holding on and hoping for a miracle, hoping that all of the damage done to the Russian economy is going to somehow bring it down and cause Putin to lose power. Um, so that's where we're at. And there's not a lot else that the West can do to change the course of this battle beyond escalating. And so we have these two new kind of escalatory threats. But eventually the Russians are going to respond. You know, they've Putin's been very, I'd say, reserved in his responses to Western escalation. I think mainly there's just been a couple. The kind of like open alliance with North Korea was definitely kind of a response, escalatory response, and then the unveiling of the Oreshnik on the munitions factory in Dnipro city. So those were kind of the two main Russian escalations. I don't think that drone thing, the drones in Poland, I think is a whole other story. Maybe we can make an episode on that, but I don't even think the Russians did that. I think that was a deception for various reasons. I'll make an episode on that, talk about the drones in Poland situation. But, anyways, it feels like to me that we're sleepwalking towards a conflict. And to what end? And this just seems incredibly reckless. It seems like, honestly, this is the most dangerous time that's ever existed in history, is right now. Like, we're walking the edge of a knife. And everyone's just so lulled into their own screens and their own problems and all this shit that, and because of kind of the slow building nature of these escalations, it doesn't really have that bite as it probably would have if all this happened at once, but it's been very incremental. um, but to me it feels like the powder is being packed into the keg and that even a mistake could cause an explosion, could cause an even an unintended escalation, and it feels like we're living in an extremely dangerous time to me. Um, and what can we do? What are we to do? I don't know. I don't know what I can do. I don't know what anybody else can really do. We're just sitting back and watching and hoping for the best. But anyways, that's all I had today, guys. Thank you so much for hopping on here and listening to my thoughts. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. And I'll catch you in the next update. Take care, everyone.